Beautiful. Wow. Love that. Thank you all. But again, thank you, Megan, for just allowing us to come on again. My name is Josani Martinez. Again, my colleague Jennifer is here. She's going to be jumping in halfway through to really talk about some additional key insights. So I'll give you a little break from me speaking, right? But just sit back, enjoy. And we're just going to deliver you some of those key insights that we saw from our 2025 resident sentiment. And that will be released and available on February 2026. So definitely just contact either myself or Jennifer if you want to get your hands on that. So just to give you a brief introduction on Longwoods, we've been conducting business in the tourism industry since 1978. So this is really 40 plus years of experience we've had here, right? We've got satellite offices in the US and as well as headquarters both in the US and in Canada. And lastly, we work with over 175 destinations and brands just like you all. I know a nice handful of our clients are in the audience today, so thank you for being present and for being partners with Longwoods International. So, really quickly, the first stop in our presentation is the background and overview of the resident sentiment study. And then we'll get into those key insights, which will cover those annual trends, as well as some generational data and comparisons that Jen is going to be covering as well. Then we'll wrap that up with some key findings and then have some time to take any questions and answers that you may have. All right, so let's get started with the origin story of the resident sentiment study. And for all of those who heard that origin story, it all started with the birth on the planet of Krypton, right? Right. Superman. No, no. Okay, I know my teammates are rolling their eyes right now, but I digress. After about 2017 to 2018, after nearly a half a century of business, Longwood's journey towards community-focused insights really began when clients started to express this growing need to understand the broader social context of the destinations the tourism industry serves. Now, this just wasn't about tracking visitor arrivals, right? It was about recognizing local residents as key stakeholders affected by tourism development and growth. And as a response to that and to this demand, Longwoods now launched its inaugural national resident study in 2018 in collaboration with Destinations International. And since then, this study really has been vital in shaping the strategic decisions that destinations and tourism organizations make throughout this industry. And it's also very helpful for DMOs and brands in navigating the complex relationship between tourism growth as well as community well being. So, why should we conduct this kind of research, right? We've covered a little bit of the history, but now we really need to look at the why behind why we should do this, especially for those of us who maybe haven't conducted something like this previously, and to also really reiterate the importance of community engagement for our industry as we look towards the future. And the first thing that I like to always highlight is the importance of perspective, right? And how what you think you know as a destination or brand may not be what your residents think, right? You may think this is the perfect time for us to build a new and improved facility, right? Or a conference center. Whereas your residents may think, now's not the time for that, right? We need to really focus on the amount of traffic and congestion that this is affecting our daily lives, or really focus on being better stewards, right? Visitors being better stewards when they come to our destination. So that's why it's so important for you to really get out there and conduct this research to really get a pulse on how your residents of your community feel towards tourism. And this is especially geared towards if your destination is focused on areas like destination stewardship, right? Sustainability or master planning, right? Resident sentiment is a key performance indicator that would allow you as a DMO to really get a more holistic view and to also allow your residents in your community a seat at that table or at least a voice in the decision making that impacts their daily lives. So let's get into the methodology, right? And this study was first conducted in partnership with DI, Destinations International, right? It is developed and revised each year. When we're looking at the study, we're looking at the overall public perceptions from all angles, right? This is including both your positives as well as your negatives in areas such as over tourism, quality of life, right? Environmental impacts. There's quite a lot that we look at when we're looking through this study. In terms of the fieldwork, it was conducted in July of 2025. we did utilize a panel approach and we surveyed around 4,000 adults who had to be 18 years and older, reside in the United States, and we always ensure that our data is weighted to ensure that we have representative sample, and that's something that we take very seriously here. So, as I mentioned previously, Jen is going to talk a little bit about the generations. And here on the screen, we do have those buckets of where we put those generations. I recently had a birthday, and I'm going a little bit through a little quarter life crisis right now looking at the screen, but it's okay. We move on, right? We're tracking on. So, with that being said, let's get into the juicy stuff, which is what we're ready for. And we're going to first dive into the overall sentiment about tourism. So the first statement that we want to look at is overall, I think tourism is good for my local area. And when we're looking at those who agree, we can see that there has been steady growth since 2020, right? We're not 7 and 10 for those who think tourism is good for the local area in 2025. That's an increase of about 8 points since 2020. When we're looking at those neutrals, we're still at that 2 and 10, right? Which has held steady year over year. So this is where we at Longwoods would really tell you to also focus your attention on, because here's where we can really apply that focused outreach, right? That really gets that needle moving and convert those neutrals into those who agree. And for those who disagree, we're at that 1 in 10 in 2025. But something that I do like to point out here is that for those who disagree, that's dropped since 2020 by 6 points. So we're really trending in the right direction here, right? And as destinations, you can really build on the positive momentum by actively communicating tourism's benefits and success stories. Moving on to the next statement, my state government is doing a good job balancing resident quality of life and visitor satisfaction. About two-fifths of Americans agree with this statement, which has also increased by 7 points since 2023. And when we're looking at those who disagree, we can see that only a quarter of Americans fall into this bucket, right? So that's a 6 point decrease since 2023. So again, we're liking to see those positive shifts going on here in this area. And lastly, we've remained at that 3 and 10 for those neutrals. So although we're seeing that public confidence in state government efforts to really balance the needs of residents and visitors has improved over the past few years, but there's still a little bit of uncertainty or at least mixed feelings about the government performance in this area. Similarly, when we're looking at the same statement, but on a local government level, we've seen growth from 2023. But looking at this chart, the initial thoughts may be that there seems to be a decrease in 2025 compared to last year, right? But as long as we do go by a 3 point margin of error, so here we would consider this to be statistically the same year over year. However, we would want to keep an eye on this if that number were to drop in the next year or upcoming years. So, with this in mind, we can see that similar to the last slide, we're about two-fifths of Americans who also agree with this statement on a local government level, which is up 5 points versus 2023. And for those who disagree, we are still at that 3 and 10, but we can see that we are trending in the right direction here, right? With us being 5 points below where we were in 2023. Similarly, we're also at that 3 and 10 for those who fall in that neutral bucket. So, for the statement in general, the positive benefits of tourism outweigh the negative impacts. We are not 7 and 10 who agree in 2025. That is a 10 point increase since 2020, right? Those double digits increases, that's something that we definitely like to see in these positive growth areas. And we can see that there has been a 7 point decrease for those who disagree, landing us at that 1 in 10 that we see in 2025. So, again, this is really just indicating that public sentiment has become increasingly favorable towards tourism, with a strong majority now recognizing these powerful impacts, right? And as DMOs, we can really use this data to help strengthen community engagement. And this is by highlighting tourism's positive contributions to the local economy, whether that be through increased jobs or a better quality of life, right? You can share a lot of this in your communications with your residents while also addressing any of those remaining areas of concern or skepticism among the neutrals and the disagreeing segments, right? Through your tailored education and outreach. So, looking at this slide, we can see that 61% care about the success of the tourism industry in their local area in 2025. This is up 9 points from 2022, while 62% want to see tourism thrive in their local area. And this is also up by 6 points. So, here we're seeing that three-fifths of Americans do have a strong sense of community investment in tourism success. These residents are not just passive observers, right? But they're active stakeholders who recognize tourism's importance to their local area. So this is really signaling again to you as DMOs and brands that there is a supportive foundation that you can really build on, and that communities are more receptive towards tourism initiatives. Essentially, this is creating an opportunity for you to really channel your community's enthusiasm into collaborative partnerships and really working on co-creating those tourism experiences that benefit both your visitors as well as your residents. So, moving on to the next statement, my local area benefits from a strong tourism industry. We can see that 6 in 10 Americans agree with this statement in 2025. That's up 7 points from what we saw in 2022. We're about 2 in 10 for those who fall in that neutral bucket, and also at about 2 in 10 for those who disagree. But again, I like to point out that we are down 6 points in this category, which is really highlighting that we're seeing that positive shift over the years. And it's showing a clear upward trend in Americans really recognizing the benefits of a strong tourism industry with fewer people questioning its value. So, moving on to the statement, I want tourism to be important in my local area. We can see that 6 in 10 residents agree with this statement. This is up 8 points since 2020. And we're only at 2 in 10 who disagree, which is also trending in the right direction here because we're now down 6 points from 2025 versus 2020, with only a quarter falling into that neutral bucket. So, we're seeing a significant shift in community priorities regarding tourism's role locally. And for DMOs, this is showing you that the community seems to be more receptive to the possibilities of investment and expansion in tourism initiatives. And it can also indicate that residents they feel more likely now. They may be more likely now than ever to support destination development, right? That prioritizes tourism growth. But of course, this is looking at the US as a whole, right? So if you do want to get a little bit more granular and know a little bit more about how your destination in particular, how your residents' perceptions are towards this area, a study like this is something that you should also consider. All right. So we're going to be moving into involvement and engagement with tourism. And looking at the first statement, I welcome tourists to this area. We see that 3/5 of Americans agree with this statement, which is in line with what we saw in 2023, while 2 in 10 disagree. And for the second statement, I look forward to showing off this area when friends and family visit. We are also at 3/5 of Americans who agree. So this saw a 7 point increase from 2023, with the disagrees also being at that 2 in 10. So overall, residents are displaying both a welcoming disposition towards tourism and genuine pride for their destination, right? They also seem to be very active participants and ambassadors who are willing to personally engage with and promote their destination. So as DMOs and brands, this really represents a sort of untapped grassroots marketing potential, right? Residents can really become those authentic voices, promoting their destination through word of mouth, social media, personal recommendations to friends and families, right? This organic sort of advocacy can be seen as more credible and can even be more cost effective than traditional advertising, right? Because this data is really suggesting that residents are already emotionally invested enough to really volunteer as these destination ambassadors. So you really should be leveraging this opportunity that you have. Similarly here, right? For the statement, I feel I am an ambassador for this area, even among tourists that I don't know. We see that we are at 4 in 10 who agree, which is 8 points above what we saw in 2023, with our disagrees being at 3 in 10. That's down 4 points from 2023. And for the statement, I recommend local tourist sites to people who are visiting my area. 6 in 10 also agree, right? This is about 9 points above what we saw in 2023 versus the 2 in 10 that disagree, which is down 6 points compared to 2023. So again, we're seeing a powerful shift towards resident-led promotion and authentic advocacy. And we can see that residents are increasingly already stepping into that role of informal tourism marketers, right? So again, a great opportunity to tap into here. Looking at this slide, we can already see that there's a little bit of room for improvement, right? 47% consider themselves informed and up to date on news about tourism in their area. These are more of your active information seekers, right? Whereas 54% are interested in finding out what's happening when they come across local tourism news. So this group, they're more passive, right? If it comes across their news feeds or across their newsletters, then maybe we'll engage, right? So we're seeing that there is interest among Americans when it comes to tourism in their local areas, But more importantly, this is telling us that as destinations, we need to be more creative, right? We need to ensure that information is engaging, that it is readily available, easy to digest, right? You really want to start to focus on curating this content that maintains those active information seekers, but also reels in that passive group, right? Most importantly, as destinations, we want to ensure that the information that you are sharing with your residents are resonating with them, right? Going past those traditional ways of news press, really getting into the strategy behind it, right? So looking at informational pull versus push, right? You can start focusing on pushing out that relevant information to residents through accessible channels, again, like your social media, your email newsletters, local news partnerships, community events, right? Rather than expecting them to actively go out searching for it. And also looking into information accessibility, right? That gap that we're seeing can also indicate that your residents may just lack the awareness of where or even how to find news about tourism, right? Are they aware of your website? Do they even know where to access tourism news, right? These are all things to consider when you're working on making information that's more visible, tangible, and integrated into your residents' regular information consumption patterns. All right, so this is the last section that you'll have to hear me from me, right? Before I pass it on to Jen. And we're going to be talking about tourism development and growth here and looking at the first statement. My local government is doing a good job managing the pace of tourism development. We can see that 2/5 of Americans agree with this statement, which is in line with what we saw in 2020, while 3 in 10 disagree, which is also in line with 2020 results. And for the second statement, residents are consulted when major tourism development takes place in this area. We are also at that 3 in 10 who agree, right? With 4 in 10 disagreeing with this statement, which is also both aligned with the results that we saw in 2020. So we're seeing a critical governance and engagement gap here that can really begin to affect that previous positive sentiment that we saw if it's not addressed. Because despite the strong community support for tourism that we're seeing, there seems to be a disconnect between government performance and resident participation, right? So this goes back to that note that I said prior, with residents feeling like they want to have a seat at the table, right? If they feel as though they're uninformed when it comes to decision making about major tourism development, or at the very least, as though their voices aren't heard, this can cause a ripple effect, right? In many ways, even going back to what I mentioned about the strong grassroots enthusiasm and that ambassadorial spirit, right? If residents continue to feel excluded from tourism planning and development decisions, a lot of that could shift to resistance. That's something we don't want, right? So, as DMOs and local governments, you really need to prioritize or at least continue to prioritize town halls, advisory committees, and other feedback channels that can really help to bridge that gap, and really preserve the positive sentiment that currently exists. Because in comparison with the other data that I've presented so far in this area, this really hasn't seen that much of a significant positive growth shift, right? So moving on to the statement, I believe tourism should be encouraged here. We see that 7 in 10 agree with this statement. This is up 12 points since 2020, with only 1 in 10 disagreeing, now down 8 points versus what we saw in 2020, with 2 in 10 falling in that neutral bucket. So we are seeing again the strong endorsement for tourism growth. And again, what we don't want to do is work backwards, right? So looking at this slide, we can see that 56% would like to see more tourists coming to their area, while 51% support building new tourism facilities that will attract visitors to their areas. So that's up by 7 points, right? Oh, forgot to say 56%. That's up by 9 points since 2020. So here we're seeing that residents do want to welcome more tourists and they are more open to the development of new tourism facilities. Something that you can do here is not only highlight how those facilities will attract new tourists to the area, but also how your residents benefit from utilizing these facilities as well. Now, the next statement, we should develop and host more major events to attract tourists to our area. We see that over half of the Americans agree with this statement. That's up about 7 points since 2020. We are only 2 in 10 for those who disagree, now down 4 points versus what we saw in 2020. And 3 in 10 are falling into that neutral bucket. So this is telling us that there is a strong community receptiveness to event-based tourism strategies as a growth mechanism, right? So we see that residents do have a particular enthusiasm for major events as a tourism driver. And that destinations should really focus on prioritizing these more event based strategies. These events can even contribute in other ways to residents, right? By generating more local pride or even providing more employment opportunities, right? So these are all things to take into consideration. And then lastly, before we move on to the economy, let's just focus in on the statement I support tourism growth. And we can see that 7 in 10 Americans agree with this statement in 2025. That is up 12 points from what we saw in 2020. Another double digit growth here, with only 1 in 10 disagreeing, which is a 7-point drop since 2020, right? So we see that there's also a drop in those neutrals, taking us from that 3 in 10 in 2020 to the now 2 in 10 in 2025. So again, it's really providing destinations with that powerful foundation for strategic initiatives, right? Like it's demonstrating that communities are ready, they're willing, and they're increasingly enthusiastic about tourism expansion. The challenge now is really just executing growth strategies while also addressing the governance and community engagement gap that we identified earlier. So, if DMOs can really marry this strong support with meaningful community engagement, you really will have an exceptional opportunity to build these world class destinations with community buy in, which you know is very important. So, with that being said, I'm going to pass it on to Jen, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Josani. That was great information.
Yours.
Wonderful job. Let me go ahead and share my screen here.
Yep, hopefully you don't have a baby's day out blunder like I did, but we're all here.
Let's see here. Okay, so hopefully you guys can you see the big economy screen?
All good. Looking good.
Oh, good. Glad to hear it. Okay, so I'm gonna take over here and we'll be looking at different sections like quality of life, economy, generational perspectives. And this is just a really great chance for you guys to see some additional data points as we continue looking at how residents feel about their local economy and looking among the regions. So, this statement tourism encourages investment in our local economy. The percent of respondents who agree increased from half in 2020 to a peak of two-thirds or 60% in 2024, then slightly decreased, but within our margin of error to that 58% level in 2025. The neutral responses all remain relatively stable here. So we're seeing that ranging from, just around that 3 and 10 level all across the board. And then the percent who disagreed dropped from 18% from 2020 to 2022 to 13% in 2025. So showing that gradual decrease over time. 2024 saw the highest agreement level at that 60% or two-thirds, and the lowest disagreement at 12% amongst all years shown. So that was really, last year was really a benchmark year, but still within our margin of error as we look at 2025. There's a positive trend in agreement over time and a notable decline in the disagreement category. So, all stuff you can do for your local economy. The statement tourism is important to my local economy. We see positive sentiment regarding tourism's economic importance has grown over time. We see 6 and 10 agree with this statement, which is up 6 points versus 2020. 2 and 10 disagree with that statement, which is down 3 points versus 2020. And then about a quarter of Americans are in that neutral category. So negative sentiment has decreased while neutrality has remained relatively steady. This aligns with our previous slide findings, showing a broader trend towards increasingly favorable views on tourism in relation to the local economy. So, looking at this statement about the economy, 54% of residents believe that the economic impact of tourists in our areas help to support industries and businesses not directly related to tourism. So, 38% believe that growth in tourism is causing prices to rise, making things less affordable for residents. So, residents understand that tourism brings both positive and negative impacts, and you can really start to build off that when you look at the differences when they're supporting industries and businesses. But they also do know that tourism can make prices rise. So they're understanding of both, and we see those impacts. So looking at further slide in the economy, housing is becoming less affordable in this area due to tourism. We see that 4 in 10 Americans agree with this statement. About a quarter remain neutral, and right around 4 in 10 there disagree with that statement. So housing is becoming less affordable, is down a little versus 2024, more mirroring the 2023 numbers. And then we also look and see my household standard of living is higher because of the money tourists spend here. This is a very important statement. So 3 in 10 Americans agree with this statement. 3 in 10 are neutral, and 4 in 10 disagree with this statement. So, looking at that standard of living, we see those results and really driving, what is being spent by tourist dollars, having the impact on their standard of living because of people coming in. So, a little more in the disagreement stage in that than the agreement stage, but all kind of bucketed into, thirds across the board. So for the economy, our last slide here in this section, the statement without tax revenues we get from tourists, we would have to pay higher provincial/state/municipal/local taxes for government programs and services. You've got 5 in 10 or half Americans agreeing with this statement, which is up 3 points versus 2020. We've got 2 in 10 Americans disagreeing with the statement, which is down 4 points in 2020. And just about a third, 3 in 10 in the neutral category. So this means most residents understand the value that tax revenues bring to their area. Now we're going to look into some quality of life information here. The statement here, quality of life in my local area has improved because of increased tourism. We see that opinions here are divided with no clear majority and nearly equal shares between agree, neutral, and disagree. While there is modest support for the idea that tourism improves local quality of life, a substantial share of respondents remain neutral or in disagreement, highlighting the nuanced impact of tourism of experiences at a local level. This contrasts with the stronger support for tourism economic benefits observed in the previous slides. So, looking at the statement, I have more recreational opportunities, places to go, and things to do because of tourism in the area. Residents are understanding that tourism helps to support many of the amenities they enjoy in their communities. Agreement is up 5 points versus 2020 into 2025, and disagreement is down 5 points in 2020 to trending in the positive direction for this question. Here's a statement: shopping opportunities are better here as a result of tourism. The positive perception of tourism's impact on shopping opportunities grew between 2020 and 2024, with just a slight retreat in 2025, but still within that margin of error. Overall, local sentiment is increasingly favorable, but opinions remain mixed, as seen by a steady proportion of neutral responses and residual disagreement there. This pattern aligns with previous slides where while more people are acknowledging tourism's benefits, there remains a portion of the population that are unconvinced or neutral. But we do see shopping having positive results and other opportunities bringing from tourism there. So we like to look at shopping and dining. Dining's got a little bit more of an impact. Dining opportunities are better here as a result of tourism. We see that half are in that agreement stage, so a little bit better than the shopping, tick higher. And with agreement coming in at 5 and 10 for 2025. I know for me, I live in Nashville, and we've seen an explosion of tourism in the past 10 years. And I saw a historian speak recently, and they really all kind of wondered what was the main driving thing that, really flipped the switches for Nashville and tourism, because there was a Wall Street Journal article calling us It City. There was a show called Nashville. And what was it? And the historian the was in the tourism sector, said his opinion was dining opportunities became much better here in Nashville, and that was a switch for people to, it's kind of like the horse and the donkey. You want to really be able to take advantage if you can provide additional dining opportunities. Some people travel as for, food and culinary tourism. So this is a real thing that can bring, life to communities with tourism, and residents recognizing the dining opportunities are better as a result of tourism. So, this is a statement: tourism supports the preservation of local court culture and protects the community's authenticity. There's a clear positive shift in public perception. More people are agreeing that tourism benefits local culture and authenticity, while skepticism is fading. 2024 and 2025 stand out with the highest rates of agreement and the lowest disagreement, possibly reflecting successful local initiatives or growing positive impacts from tourism during those years. Neutral opinions remain in that 3 and 10 buckets, so mostly unchanged, just suggesting some uncertainty or mixed experiences. And then overall, the data is just showing increased confidence that tourism supports preservation of local culture and community authenticity. So now we're going to look into the environment. We've got a couple of slides for looking at environmental impacts. The statement: the tourism industry values sustainability and our natural resources. Agreement with this statement ties with last year, which was a record high. We see continuing to see that 43% agreement with tourism industry valuing sustainability and our natural resources. There's a consistent neutrality. Around a third of respondents remain unconvinced either way, reflecting that ambivalence there. But overall, there's an upward trend in positive attitudes, although broad consensus remains elusive, with also, a good amount of the neutral and disagree sentiments. Tourists are respectful of our natural area. We can see here that 4 in 10 respondents agree with this statement. So we take a took a little step back, but still within our margin of error in 2025. Last year was our first year asking this question. So we do see similar data results in the neutral and the disagree category. Uh, but we do see this type of information studied on a local level can be useful for campaigns to increase education on how to be a responsible tourist. Tourists should be educated on how to travel responsibly and care for our natural areas. This is along the lines with the previous slide, with the vast majority, 7 in 10, agreeing that tourists should be educated on how to travel responsibly and care for the natural areas. There weren't any changes year over year, but that reflects the consistent attitudes here, especially since this was a new question for last year. So we want to keep showing you that trend line as we get a first year of data. It's exciting. And then when we see that agreement reflected, and stays in line year over year, we can start to build trending around that information, which is what we have a lot of here. Now we're going to look at tourism employment. We kept this module expanded this year as we did last year. Most Americans agree that tourism offers entry level opportunities, but perception decreases when we discuss careers. So, millennials are much more positive about tourism employment than other generations. We're going to see those results here as we look at the overall information. So, looking back through the last 5 years and the statement, there are jobs in the tourism industry with desirable pay and benefits. We're improving perception here. The increase in agree and disagree. decrease in disagreement indicate growing optimism about the quality of jobs in tourism regarding pay and benefits. Stable neutrality, one third of respondents remain neutral each year, just maybe reflecting that uncertainty or lack of direct experience. And 2024 and 2025, certainly a standout year, an agreement that is highest and disagreement lowest in these years, implying either recent improvements or positive publicity for tourism jobs. Now we're going to look at that same statement. There are jobs in the tourism industry with desirable pay and benefits and look at it across the generations. So we can see the US norm falls at 50% here. And millennials have the highest percentage of agreement at 54%, or almost 6 in 10, indicating greater optimism about job quality in tourism compared to other generations and the national norm. Generation Z is most skeptical with the lowest agreement, which is 4 in 10 there, and the highest neutral response at just under 4 in 10. And then boomers and Gen X are similar to the US norm, showing moderate agreement, just around half there, and the lowest rates of disagreement. So there are opportunities for advancement in the tourism industry. We look at that throughout the last 5 years. Perceptions of career advancement opportunities in tourism have improved in recent years. We see disagreement continues to shrink, and a majority now see tourism as providing professional growth, though many remain neutral in this stance. The data signifies growing confidence in tourism as a viable career path, which keeps with the broader perspective of trends for tourism employment. So, all good information there to see on that slide. And we see the US norm at 51% in terms of agreement. Now we're going to break it out into the generations. And we see that once again, millennials are the most optimistic about career advancement in tourism, with almost 6 in 10 agreeing, well above the national norm and other generations. They're neutral, 3 in 10, and disagree at 1.5 in 10 rates are also lower than most, suggesting a strong belief in advancement opportunities. We do see here that Generation Z is the most skeptical, with the lowest agreement at 4 in 10 and the highest disagreement at 2 in 10. So more than a third are neutral, indicating uncertainty there. This overall data highlights major generational divides, with millennials emerging as the most positive generation regarding career growth in the tourism sector. Millennials and boomers are the most optimistic when we see tourism industry offers many entry level employment opportunities. So we see the US norm is there at 6 in 10, and millennials are once again top with 6 in 10 results in the agreement category. For neutral, just one quarter, and the low, very low in the disagreement category. So Generation X matches the US norm and agreement of 6 in 10 and has the lowest disagreement, just 1 in 10. And then Generation Z is an outlier in skepticism with much lower agreement, 46% or 4 in 10, and a higher disagreement, 2 in 10 than other generations. So the tourism industry is perceived as providing strong entry level opportunities, most substantially among millennials, Gen X, and boomers, in line with or above the US norm. So now we're looking at most jobs in the tourism industry are low paying and seasonal. This slide analyzes perceptions about the, the United States from 20 to 2025. Despite improvement in other areas of tourism employment, we still can't shape this perception that jobs are low paying and seasonal. Almost half of Americans consistently perceive jobs as predominantly low paying, especially in recent years. While skepticism about this view is decreasing, there remains a significant neutral group, highlighting uncertainty or lack of awareness about wage and seasonal trends in tourism. And really, this overall reflects persistent concerns and challenges in the public perception about job quality in this particular tourism sector. So, really, people just think of jobs in the tourism industry. A lot of people think of, like you're at a ski lodge and the ski slope operator or a front desk receptionist, and people just don't tend to think about director of sales and GMs at hotels. And in terms of DMOs, having a director of a DMO or director of marketing, all the different director positions that become available in terms of CEOs. So really, there's just that perception there that most jobs are low paying and seasonal, and I think that's something where we can really strive to educate people in, the advances that you can have in the tourism industry as part of your career. So when we break that out amongst generations, millennials are the most critical of the tourism job market, and seeing it as low paying and seasonal more than other age groups. This is down 3 points from last year, so trending closer to the US norm level. Gen Z is more divided, with higher disagreement compared to older generations. Boomers and Gen X show higher neutrality, perhaps indicating less direct understanding or investment in tourism employment. So, interesting to see that divide amongst the generations. And once again, where we see those, millennials are kind of more critical actually in this area. So, the statement tourism industry offers rewarding careers. This shows how millennials are most optimistic, with almost 6 in 10 agreeing tourism offers rewarding careers. This is up 2 points versus last year. Their neutrality, which is a quarter, and disagreement, 2 in 10, are lower than the US norm, indicating greater positivity and conviction. Generation Z is notably less positive, with the lowest agreement, 4 in 10, and the highest disagreement, one quarter, suggesting skepticism about the industry's career rewards. And Generation X matches closely with the national norm, while boomers have a lower agreement rate, 5 in 10, and the highest neutrality at 36%. So, this last data slide shows generational differences in willingness to encourage friends and family to work in the tourism industry in the United States. Millennials are most likely to recommend tourism employment to friends and family, with one half agreeing, well above the US norm. Older generations, especially boomers, are less enthusiastic, suggesting that skepticism or lack of faith in tourism job prospects. The data underscores generational divides in recommending tourism jobs, with overall sentiment being lukewarm, substantial neutrality, and a significant share of respondents just being maybe not as inclined to recommend a career in the tourism industry. So, this is where we can really engage with our residents and communicate a plan and put out messaging that would encourage, working in the tourism industry as being a rewarding experience and being positive overall for people, whether they're entry level or mid career, being a great opportunity. So this brings us to our key takeaways for Josani and I. We look at growth and momentum as being one of the first. Tourism sentiment remains highly positive and continues to trend upwards in the U.S., with more residents than ever supporting tourism's role in states and local communities. Keep building on this momentum to drive both local pride and economic impact, as Josie said. Engage and empower residents. So there's been a greater call for active resident involvement in tourism development decisions. Proactively gather that feedback and communicate plans transparently, and ensure your local voices help guide growth to strengthen trust and community alignment. So all positive messaging there. We want to address affordability and equity. Concerns over housing costs and affordability remain prominent. prioritize tourism development strategies that address resident cost of living impacts and work to balance those economic benefits with housing equity and quality of life safeguards. So, just really want to be aware of that, of affordability and advancing workplace opportunities. So, while the tourism sector is recognized for entry level and advancement opportunities, Gen Z continues to show lower sentiment regarding long term career prospects. So, really, this advanced workforce is a similar takeaway to last year. We're still just not getting the engagement from Gen Z. These numbers aren't moving in the direction we'd like for the industry, and we must make a better effort as Gen Z is our future, right? So invest in those targeted outreach, education, and success stories to uplift the tourism workforce and inspire that next generation participation. Which brings me to the conclusion of our webinar. We thank you so much today. This is our contact information. You can scan the QR codes. You've got our emails here. And we'll be happy at this point to take any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. There we go.
Jen, it looks like we and well, Jen and Josie, you both did amazing. So thank you. But it looks like we do have a couple of questions already. So one that was already answered in the chat was asking about how far back does the nationwide benchmark go? And so that is back to 2020. So you guys just saw all of the data that we have access to. I mean, we do have more, but to that 2020 was as far back as we go with our representative nationwide study. Another question in the chat was, do you see a difference in people's opinion when it comes to tourism at the state and national level versus their local city or county level? And then if so, what do you think we as local DMOs can do to help?
Yeah, that's really, I mean, where you can get the most engagement certainly is on a local level where you can have that direct relationship with your residents and be able to engage them through, education, stewardship, and, it's still on a state level being supportive of that macro level overall role that the state plays in tourism and, what you get government funding. So really just being able to pay attention to that message and increase your advocacy efforts, and then having the local role play more of a direct engagement with the residents in the area.
Thanks. That's really helpful. Um, and then Josie, for you, it seems like the data shows that not very many people feel consulted when major tourism development takes place. What would you suggest we do to help? Yeah, well, I know I had briefly stated it previously, but really taking advantage of these town halls that you have, right? These advisory committees, any feedback platforms that you have. These are all things that you can utilize to really get more engaged with your residents, make them feel like they have more of a seat at the table, and also really just creating these kind of structured opportunities for your residents to just give you that feedback, right? And demonstrate how using that feedback can help shape the actual policies that you come up with, right? Or the initiatives. Because this is going to allow you to really build that trust and ensures that the development that you come up with or these initiatives are really just aligning with the community values and just in maintaining that strong support, right? So really just utilizing what you have and ensuring that you are in communication with these residents. That is the best way, and the best way for their voices to feel heard, and the best way for them to feel like they're actually a part of the decision making. Because let's be honest, a lot does go into decision making, and you're not going to sit down and listen to every single resident, right? But having these surveys, right, and having these town halls is really going to allow them to be in a place where they can feel like they are speaking to you directly. Right, and I feel like too, and anytime that you guys are doing surveys to your community, sorry, I have a sucker. I just realized, so anytime you are talking to your communities, like making sure that you're saying, we're doing this to listen, we're wanting to use your feedback. Yeah, that's really great points. Thanks, Josie. And then Megan, this question's for you. When will the deck be available?
Hi, everyone. So we will have this is being recorded, so everyone will receive a YouTube link by later this week with all this great information.
Thank you.